Morning, Grid Connections listeners. Today we're thrilled to have Quincy Lee, the founder of Electric Era, join us. In this episode, we'll dive deep into how Electric Era positions itself as a leading charge point operator in the rapidly evolving EV charging landscape. Quincy will share insights on the current state of EV charging and reveal how Electric Era leverages hardware along with cutting-edge software to differentiate itself and prioritize customer experience. If you find this episode valuable, please share it with at least one other person who might enjoy it. And don't forget to leave a positive review on our podcast page. Your support helps us continue bringing you insightful conversations with industry leaders. With that, enjoy.
I'm the CEO and founder of Electric Era. Our company builds EV fast charging stations for gas stations, convenience stores, and quick service restaurants that are modernizing their offerings for EV drivers. Prior to founding Electric Era in 2020, I was a SpaceX engineer for 7 years, where I worked on predominantly the Starlink program. So SpaceX's constellation of satellites. I was one of the earliest team members on that, joining the team in about early 2016. And in my final role there, I was responsible for the global rollout of the Gateway ground station antennas, which are the large antennas that provide backhaul connectivity to Starlink users and the terrestrial internet. So, our team is very product focused and engineering and technology focused, and I think we'll touch on a lot of that today during the conversation. Good to be here with you.
That's great. And I guess something I should say just personally, Quincy, I want to say thank you for that. I actually use Starlink myself. I had been living in Hood River, Oregon, which is kind of outside of Portland, Oregon by about an hour or so. And where we were, the internet was terrible. And I think, got Starlink back it was pretty early, like 2020, maybe 2021. One of the first users in Oregon, I guess, so we were told.
Nice.
And then now I live in Bend, Oregon, which is actually a lot larger, but we had actually gone with the local internet provider, and then it turned out to be really bad. It dropped so much more than Starlink, so we actually ended up just getting Starlink again, and now that's what we're using here in Bend, just because it's so much more stable than even the local fiber, which I was pretty surprised by too. So. But that's just aside. I would love to talk to you more about that. Yeah, it's been such great service.
It's definitely a fantastic product. It's really, I think, opening up the internet to a lot of places that obviously historically haven't had it. So happy to hear that you guys have had a good experience with it. Sometimes, for early adopters, it wasn't always as good in the early days, but I'm glad it's doing great now.
No, it's funny. The only issue we ever had, especially here in Bend, is whenever thunderstorms, lightning storms would come through, it would kind of disrupt it, and then it would like drop down every so often. But that was really the first year we lived here, and ever since then, even when lightning storms and stuff come through, I haven't had an issue. So it's definitely better than the local option.
Yeah, it's funny. Like back in those early days of Starlink, that they were really just chasing nines, right? They were trying to get reliability higher and higher and higher. And I'm having kind of deja vu all over again, because that was what I was working on and focused on extensively when I left Starlink. And now I'm focused on it extensively as we scale up our EV fast charging network and charging stations for customers all over the country. We're religiously focused on reliability, and we define reliability very meticulously as when you plug in doesn't work immediately. And we're chasing nines, right? We're trying to get up to 99.9% success rates, and that's an extremely challenging thing to do. Not a lot of people are doing it, but that's really what matters to the EV driver base. So we're going through that whole effort that we went at Starlink all over again here at Electric Era as we build out our charging stations.
That might have been like an almost perfect segue. I just want to commend you on that. Maybe you should be the host. But no, obviously we could talk about probably Starlink for another hour. But what I'm really interested in is what we're interested about too is exactly that, like electric vehicle reliability, specifically charging. The vehicles themselves, it's not so much an issue. It's really the charging infrastructure. And I'm kind of curious to learn, like, what was it that made you start Electric Era? I think a lot of people have had their own experiences, but what really was there any one moment that you're just like, I can't stand this, someone needs to step into this space and improve this experience for EV drivers?
Yeah, I think way back in 2018, from a more existential perspective, I started Electric Era because I really felt that the world was not making fast enough progress on decarbonization of transportation. And ironically, while watching a SpaceX rocket launch, I kind of was looking at the Earth getting smaller and smaller in the rear-facing camera of the rocket, and thought to myself, man, I should be spending my time and talents, making the world a better place as opposed to sending technologies out into the cosmos, which obviously I love too. But it was just that kind of that moment tied in with the existentialism question that really got me to jump and leave SpaceX in 2020 and start Electric Era. I think when I started the company, it really was around that premise of, man, charging's terrible. It's really expensive. It's hard to build. It takes years to build in some cases. How do we make all that better? Because it's a key linchpin in the overarching EV adoption motion that we're going through. Folks, I hear it from folks all the time. They're like, man, I don't want to buy an EV. I can't charge my car anywhere. And the common retort is, well, what about at your house? And more people than not don't have good, consistent places to charge. And even if they did, they still need to be able to charge up their car around town.
Right.
So solving that gap, that infrastructural gap, and actually doing a good job, it was like the motivation for the business. And clearly there's so much frustration online. People are fed up with the charging reliability, fed up with the lack of uptime, fed up with the cut cables, fed up with the low charging speeds, fed up with the lack of transparency. We're aiming to solve all of those problems at Electric Era.
Well, that's, I think, probably welcome news to the people listening to this. What to you, like when you started in 2020 to now, have been kind of the biggest, like chasing those nines? Like what has been the biggest maybe wins or like improvements you've seen over the last 4 years to really help make those big first early differences? Kind of the quick moving, high impact.
Yeah, I mean, I would say most of the last 4 years have really just been about building the technology stack, and only recently have we started to scale up. But now that the scale up is underway, and now we're really in the chase the nines frame of mind, I think like the things that we did early on from a technology perspective that gave us the framework to go and effectuate EV fast charging reliably were probably threefold. One, we were able to solve the grid infrastructure problem by building our charging stations with the battery backing the charging station. Um, Having that battery there actually allows you to, ride through a lot of transients and electrical variations that you might see from the grid, and actually keep your charging station online and healthy when the grid is having challenges. So that's a big part of it. I think a more important part is having edge compute on site. A lot of people do this. They don't really do it that well, but certain folks have put site controllers at their charging stations. That local low latency compute is super valuable for a bunch of different reasons. And it gives you, again, a good foundational framework to go build super reliable charging stations that work all the time. And then finally, the third pillar is like a vertically integrated software stack. And that's really where the rubber hits the road. If you're not owning the entire end-to-end software stack, or you're charging at a charging company that does not have a vertically integrated software stack, expect bad things to happen. Because basically everybody in the industry, with the exception of like essentially Tesla and Rivian and us, they outsource all their software. They give this part to that company, this part to that company, this part to that company. They're not actually building technology. They're not actually building software. They're pulling it all together from other vendors. And that leads to interconnection handoffs. That leads to finger pointing. That leads to a very poor user driver experience. That's the most important pillar. That's, I think, where we really shine. Because we own everything in house, we can go really, really low into the firmware adjacent software stack, and make the charging experience super good across everything from payments to UX on the driver screen or on the charging station screen, to the OCPP 1.6 connection and actual charger activation, to everything else that is required to make a charging station session successful.
And I think that's great to hear. So let's say you are a listener to this podcast and you drive an EV and you hear all this stuff. That sounds amazing. How do drivers find electric era chargers, or ones using that technology, to really make sure that they're going to the ones probably with the best uptime?
Yeah, so you can find us on PlugShare, you can find us on Apple Maps, you can find us on Google Maps, and because we're in Apple Maps and Google Maps, we populate in the infotainment systems of all the major automotive companies, with the exception of Tesla and a few others. So those are kind of the most common ways of discoverability. And you'll notice right out the gate that we actually have good driver reviews. You go into a PlugShare review of an average charging station, and the driver reviews are terrible, right? It's
Right.
like comically bad. One of my favorite driver reviews in PlugShare was somebody saying, wow, this is the future. We need this all over America. Like that made me feel so good because it's kind of the manifestation or the verbalization of the vision of the company. It's just like build EV fast charging everywhere. That's awesome. So drivers can just get on with their lives and have an amazing experience and not worry about the frustration of charging their car.
So we have a lot of listeners all over the US. As these are rolling out more, is there anything, are there certain areas that your team's looking at first and kind of rolling out from that way? Or are there certain partnerships or others that drivers might be best to kind of look for to find electric era chargers?
Yeah, I think in our first couple quarters of sales, we were eager to build charging stations wherever and whenever. And our initial sales motion and installation pattern was kind of scattershot as a result, right? So we have charging stations in Boston and Portland. We have another one coming in Portland. We have another one in Southern Oregon. We have 3 coming online in Northern California. And then we have, randomly one in Missouri and Tennessee and others popping up. I think as we focus, we're gonna put our minds to work on building out specific concentrated corridors, leveraging our customers' properties and our custom and coaching our customers to go to market with their charging stations there. I think that's going to be key to provide contiguous coverage of like super seamless and easy to use charging that's really fast. So that'll be what we start to shift towards going into the next couple years ahead of us. But what will that look like in practice? Well, you can kind of imagine, right, where that'll be, right, based off of EV adoption rates. It's like the West Coast. Surprisingly, the Northeast is actually getting a ton of usage. Our charging station out there gets a ton of usage every day, and I think that reveals that there's a lot of EV adoption in the Northeast as well. And then I think actually Texas is going to be a sleeper, but come along fast in terms of EV adoption rates in the kind of Tri-City area. So we'll probably focus predominantly on the West Coast, the Northeast, maybe all the way even out to Pennsylvania and Ohio, down to Virginia, and then Texas. I think those will be our first core focus areas, but nothing set in stone yet. And we're still trying to figure that out actively internally.
Totally. And has it been like NEVI funding or incentive? What has kind of like what makes an area kind of a better focus for electric era to go after, other than maybe electric vehicle driver density?
Well, it all starts with driver density, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's the kind of leading indicator of the financial health of a charging station. A spicy and lesser known fact about EV fast charging stations is you can actually make a crap ton of money off them and actually have good margins. So ironically, EVgo and Electrify America, their networks are actually making a fair bit of revenue and are supporting decently high profit margins and unit economics. That's a toolkit that we're bringing to our customers who want to own and operate their own charging stations and capture share of wallet from a new class of drivers. And it makes most sense financially from a pure commercialization perspective to build in high EV density areas because, your stations get so much more utilization. Outside of that, I mean, yeah, certainly NEVI funding is really key. We have 2 stations coming online in Delaware from NEVI funding. We have an Ohio station that we were recently awarded. We have one in New Mexico actually coming online by the end of the year. And we have a really, really big announcement that we're not ready to share about a huge state where we were awarded. So that'll be coming out soon as well. But
great, congrats! We'll have to have you back on for that one.
Yeah, no, it's a pretty exciting one. I don't think we're technically ready to talk about it, but basically
totally
that was a big award for us and our customer. So there's lots of good stuff happening all over the country, and I think drivers should expect to see a lot of electric era powered charging stations across the country in years to come.
That's great. So we've had a lot of people on the show that kind of talk about the challenges around the business model for EV chargers. And you look at the traditional kind of C-stores or kind of fueling stations where majority of their profit actually comes from selling hot dogs or what they actually sell in store versus actually trying to make money off gas. I realize some of this may be a little bit secret saucy, but I'm kind of curious, is it just, does it have to go with the site assessment to make sure you have high utilization of the site, or what are some of the areas that really, especially if you are like a person with an interest in putting in a charging location, like what are kind of the tips and tricks to really make sure you're getting that high revenue and high margin return on the electric vehicle infrastructure investment.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that makes our company so cool is we're very tech forward. So we actually built an entire machine learning model just that we actually give our customers access to for free to help them figure out where their highest sessions per day will be across their portfolio of stores. Um, so that is kind of the most important part of the process. And we actually just released a blog post on our website today about that. So you, for anybody on that's listening into this, maybe you could add it to the show notes,
Yeah,
Chase.
for
But
sure.
there's a blog post that we just put out today about actually the step-by-step process of how we walk our customers through this. But the first step is basically ingest the locations, figure out where the highest sessions per day are, and from there financially stack rank the locations based off of the sessions per day, but also the utility tariff and any sort of kind of tax incentives that they can get. And then the output of that is a list of stations that are financially attractive and um, have an associated return of rate of internal rate of return, and from there we can have a pretty financially literate conversation with our customers and just boil it down to the basics of the business, and assess if the locations based off of the forecasts are going to be attractive or not. That doesn't include things like in-store sales, which you're right is the number one profit winner of the kind of car refill business. I think there's like the old expression in the gas world, where it's like you make a nickel per gallon on gas, and then you make 90% profit margins on the Coke in the store
Right.
because you have a captive audience. So that is going to be true for EV fast charging, and actually, that's another big reason why we're so stoked about retail adjacent fast charging is because it provides kind of an anchor for the business and ancillary revenue streams that they'll be relying on for decades to come. And charging an amenity that complements that and gets new EV drivers to that location. Um, so yeah, I would encourage people to check out that blog. It's on our website at electricerotechnologies.com. And Chase, if you wouldn't mind adding
Yeah,
it
no,
to the show
I'll
notes,
make sure
that'd
to
be
have in
cool.
the notes for today's episode.
Cool.
One of the things we were talking about right before we kind of recorded was, and this is also interesting to me, kind of having more of a software background, is as you've mentioned, really having a software first focus, and I think that has worked well for others like Tesla and Rivian. But can you kind of go a little bit more on the actual tech stack and what that might look like, and kind of what separates Electric Air from a lot of others in the space right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think like I talked about it a little bit. I talked about some of the important parts of it earlier on, but I'll go a little bit deeper. Basically, every single electric car EV fast charging station has an on-site energy storage system, um, and at least two chargers, maybe up to four. Some of our early stations only had one, but basically going forward, we'll always at least have two or four chargers.
And
Um, in
I'm sorry to cut you off there. What's kind of led to that decision to make sure you have the battery, and then also that 2 to 4 charger versus larger sites?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the 2 to 4 larger site configuration is kind of a output of the learnings that we've seen from the Tesla diaspora, excuse me, where all these Tesla people left Supercharge and they kind of went out in the world and they started to interview with companies like us. And one of the learnings from that experience was, yeah, you got to standardize. You got to provide kind of configurations that make sense within all of your business motion. So everything from the supply chain team to the implementation team to the contractors you use to construct the site, having a standardized set of deliverables uh, really is key to kind of simplifying the go-to-market motion. So that's part of the reason why we have two or four. I think
Interesting.
we actually technically also have a six sizer, but um, standardization is key. It's way better to do that than say three or five, and maybe sometimes a seven, and maybe sometimes a
Yeah,
one. Like that just creates a lot
just
of
got more
chaos
efficient
internally.
productization of what your offerings
Yeah,
are. Yeah,
yeah. I mean, we think of the product as the whole charging station. It's and everything that goes into building it, from supply chain to implementation to the contractors to the software to of course the charger. The charger is just a small part, and I
right.
think that's people need to up level their thinking. It's the whole charging station that matters. It's not just the charger. And part of our charging station, to answer your previous question, is a battery system. We are kind of one of the first to really take the lead on battery backed EV fast charging stations. there's companies out there like formerly FreeWire, who I think went out of business,
Right.
and or ADS Tech, who I think is still in business, that have a battery integrated charger. For people to have a simple mental model, it's basically the difference between the two battery approaches is kind of like the difference between a gas station that has a big gas pump or tank rather
Right.
underneath it.
The
That's
store.
like
Yeah.
that's what gas stations do today, versus a battery integrated charger is like a gas pump with a little gas tank inside of it that runs out really quick.
Yeah.
And we realized that early on. We built a software system called Power Simulation that is like a full physics simulator of charging stations. We can simulate 10,000 days and kind of figure out all the edge cases, et cetera. From that, we ran our models, and we are like, oh yeah, like that doesn't make sense. But battery backed EV fast charging stations are more technically difficult, and you have to have really low latency power control to
Right.
do it well. So that's a challenge, and part of the reason we have an edge compute system on site.
So
Um,
and I'm sorry to keep interrupting you. This is just really
oh, it's all good.
fascinating. So is the battery backup not so much? I think we've heard, and you're totally right. You have some that have kind of done it where it's directly tied to the charger, and then like Tesla and some others will do it so it's a much larger one tied to the site. And is the reason for tying it more to the site driven to reliability, or is it to avoid like long-term costs due to charges from the utility and stuff like that, or is it just kind of a healthy mix of both?
It's predominantly the latter.
Yeah.
So it's
Okay.
it's it's mainly a means of keeping the total cost of ownership as low as possible. So keeping demand charges low, and also keeping time to
Okay.
market low. So we can install in as little as, I think we've done as little as 4 months. Our average is probably 5 to 6, and it basically is a way to decrease the grid requirements on site pretty substantially. So
So
that gets
minimizes
us
like transformers and kind of the larger stuff that really can slow down some of these projects.
the vast majority of EV fast charging here on out will, especially as we head into the next 5 to 10 to 20 years, is going to be battery backed. And it's mainly a function of the grid being undersized and the supply chain challenges around transformers. So I think battery backed fast charging is definitively here to stay. And um, we're
And so the
super
supply
happy.
chain for that's much greater right now, and than it is for transformers and the supporting infrastructure.
Yeah, exactly. It's like
Interesting. And
batteries
it makes
are
sense, but
super available, transformers are not.
yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
just use the one that's available and cheap and getting cheaper every day, as opposed to the one that's not available and getting more expensive every day.
Are you seeing an overlap? It seems like it'd be a different maybe not necessarily different chemistry, but slightly different supply chain around. People talk about like year ago, EV batteries really expensive, and now we're kind of seeing, due to some of the changes with that supply chain, that the prices have come down because there's more supply. Is that same with the battery backups that your team is purchasing, or just kind of coincidental, or is still kind of a niche enough market that you're able to kind of keep up with the supply?
I would not be surprised if batteries were anywhere from $20 to $30 per kilowatt hour from wholesalers by the end of the decade, or at latest by 2035. It basically is getting super freaking cheap, and
Yeah,
it's largely a function of a huge amount of production capacity coming online across the world. Everything from the raw material extraction to the refining to the shipment systems to the processing and manufacturing of battery cells to the battery pack manufacturing, all the way up. So China is doing what China does really well, which is they are pushing the price curve down and down and down, and are essentially commoditizing the offering. We saw them
yeah,
do this with solar, and now we're
right.
seeing it with battery cells. And they're also actually doing it with power electronics, which is something we're starting to think about more and more. But basically, um, I think it's broadly good. I know there's a lot of like discussions about what do we do with China? What do we do with China? Like, at the end of the day, China is making a lot of really important technologies that are important to the energy transition. So and they're drastically cutting the price down and down and down, and that
Yeah,
makes the products more accessible for others. So I think it's honestly, we need to figure out kind of how to keep that relationship, moving in a good direction, in my opinion, especially as it pertains to the clean energy technologies.
for sure. So you're looking at primarily. I mean, I haven't heard about it as much lately, but obviously one of the other big kind of grid-tied battery backup systems was kind of like redox batteries and some of these other things, more usually utility scale. But it sounds like everything that you've been doing, or like kind of like utility solar scale sort of stuff, it sounds like it's all just been lithium ion based grid tied batteries.
Yeah, 100%. So
Yeah.
lithium iron phosphate, that's the specific chemistry that we use, and we use it for a few different reasons. It's typically a higher power chemistry, and it's capable of longer cycle life, and it's actually kind of become it actually, I think, is definitely the lowest cost chemistry on the market. And that's largely coming from the fact that the majority of EVs are using it as their primary chemistry now. Like,
Yeah.
we don't really need cobalt, alumina, nickel solutions anymore. We can just use lithium iron phosphate and get the range that the average driver expects. So that's, I think, a big win for the
That's huge.
environment,
Yeah.
and also for the cost structure of the product. I think actually there's some pretty interesting news coming out of China around um, sodium ion battery cells. I actually haven't studied that extensively, but technically the kind of bill of materials cost from a raw materials perspective is cheaper for sodium. So if China and other manufacturers can figure out how to productize that and scale it up and achieve economies of scale, then theoretically we should even be able to go into another another big step down in price for dollar per kilowatt hour, which would be sweet. And sodium ion has longer cycle life, which is really key for our application and others.
Right.
So we're keeping an eye on that, and pretty exciting stuff coming.
No, I mean, that's great. And that's been such a big, there's definitely been more talk of sodium ion. And unfortunately, it just seems to be, it's been mostly focused on the Chinese market than anything from the domestic manufacturers. And it does kind of feel like it's where LFP was only just a few years ago. So I think there is a large potential for it, especially in these kind of grid related things where weight density or energy density by weight isn't as critical as it is in automotive. And it's been impressive already just seeing how many of these different battery technologies have increased in that energy density too so quickly.
Yeah, the energy density is an interesting one, and I think I haven't studied sodium ion closely, but I suspect with the vehicle level efficiency and range benefits that are kind of that companies like Tesla and Rivian and others are unlocking, we'll be able to unlock and continually use lower and lower energy density
Right.
capable
That's a
cells.
good point. Yeah.
And that's basically what happened with nickel, right? Everyone was like, "Oh my God, we got to put a crap ton of energy in these cells because everything's so expensive and the aeros
Yeah.
package is not good and thermal control and is not great and the powertrain isn't is efficient yet." And then over 5 to 10 years, Tesla got all those things figured out, and they were able to unlock lithium iron phosphate. So perhaps they'll be able to do it again. So it'll be interesting to see.
For sure. So we talked about kind of the battery side to it. So what in this stack is kind of like the next part? It goes from the battery to then obviously the actual charger itself. And have there been any things in particular with that charging hardware that you guys really look for, or that you've noticed is a big part of the reliability? I mean, I know from some it's kind of been charging cords and the cables to really get kind of down to the parts and pieces of it. But I'm just kind of curious what your team has seen.
Yeah, let me share my screen. I don't know if people can see this on on their screen, but if you're on YouTube or you're watching this, you'll be able to see the following. So here's a good slide on just like how we think about reliability. I think everybody and anybody in the entire industry needs to understand this fundamental concept, which is why I'm going to start here. So there's a very big difference between just is the station online, which is one part of reliability,
Right.
and does the station successfully charge? Really, all that the driver cares about is that second part. They care about that the charging session was successful. They plugged in, they quickly tapped their credit card or Google Pay or Apple Pay, and boom, they're off to the races. And the power starts ramping up, and they can go inside and not even think about it. Like that walk away moment of I trust that it's charging and I don't have to fiddle around with
Right.
my app anymore is like the
Yep.
delight that we are trying to capture with our drivers. Um, so that's what we do. I mean, we're actually quite good at that second part. We're also very good at the first part. So the first part is just basics. It's like, can you tie your shoes? It's like, is the station online? Is it up? Is it operational? Well, we know down to the millisecond if it is at our stations because we have that edge compute system and we have an LTE antenna and we have a team of 5 to 6 engineers on our network operations center. We actually literally staff a network operations center, which is pretty crazy and pretty wild, but it's like a cultural defect or a cultural carryover from our Starlink days. And
No, I think
we
that's
like
huge. You just
we
don't see, like, I think
monitor.
that's where a lot of others struggled at first.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I I don't know if this is true, but I heard the other day that Electrify America has 80 people on their network operations team, which is crazy, you know? So
Yeah.
we're able to basically have one person on call and monitoring the fleet at any given
Wow.
time. And we actually expect to, because we leverage so much software, we expect to continue, maybe slightly increase, but predominantly continue that like single source coverage.
Yeah. That's wild.
Even as we go and build eventually more charging stations than Electrify American EV Go, which I actually think we will go do. So that's a key way to just discern if it's up and operational. Some of the more challenging things are like, okay, did the cable get cut? Well, you have to be able to tell with your software if the cable got cut. And if it did get cut, then you need to alert the network operations center operator immediately, at which point they can go and look at the telemetry and figure out, oh, yeah, it got cut. We need to trigger a technician to go out there. So at that point, or let's say if the screen breaks or if there's like a pump or a power module, something like that that fails, we can see all of that. And we then go and trigger a maintenance technician to go out and fix it. So we're very much in the monitor early, monitor often, and monitor with software frame of mind so that we can stay ahead of downtime issues. The more challenging part is the charging session reliability. In order to successfully charge, you have to oversee and successfully initiate everything in the following sequence. Car shows up, they plug in, they tap their payment, their credit card, whatever. The charger actually connects and starts talking to the car. There's a about 10 step to 20 step process that they go through. There's like a checklist of electrical safety tests, things like ground isolation and faults that they need to go and work through together, the car and the charger. And then if that all passes, then the session initiates. At which point you start to ramp up power, and the car says, "Give me more, give me more, give me more," and at which point you'll kind of reach your peak power, and then you'll then start to do the longer dwell. And of course, as everybody knows in our industry, like then the power rolls off as you get to higher and higher states of charge in the battery. Um, you also need to be able to like be ready for a driver to come by and like quickly rip out the connector because drivers do that all the time. So you need to be able to like safely turn it off really quick. And if anything in that sequence goes wrong, you need to have kind of well, first off, you should just design your software such that it doesn't go wrong, right? Like if the payment doesn't work, you failed, right? You failed the charging session reliability test. If the power doesn't initiate or the car can't talk to the charger, you failed. So designing the software at a lower level to make sure that those don't fail is super key. But if there is a failure, you need to be able to like quickly recover it in software so that the driver doesn't notice. For example, power cycling some power module so that it comes back up safely and is ready to then deliver power into the car, as an example. So all that to say, that's the brains of the operation. We started this conversation talking about our technology. That's the
Yeah.
core technology. It's really this vertically integrated software that makes Tesla really good at what they do. It's what makes Rivian really good at what they do, and all the fancy controls that they have in their cars. And it's what makes Electric Era really fantastic at, charging our customers, EV drivers' cars.
Yeah, one of the things I hear a lot from EV drivers is like, why don't they work? This just seems so simple. It's been solved in so many other industries in a way. And I think the more you learn about the industry or the technology, especially, you realize it isn't the concept of what you're trying to execute is pretty simple, but there are a lot of things involved with making sure it's done efficiently and then also safely. And in your opinion, is that just because a lot of others have struggled with having a really strong kind of software first approach with kind of making the experience more difficult for EV drivers and kind of reliability in general?
I I, I think the very skeptical and pessimistic person in me says, "Man, I just don't think they care."
Hmm.
I think that one of the core cultural things that makes our company so exceptional is we're just super obsessed with EV drivers. And so is Tesla, and so is Rivian. Like there's an element of love in their products and an element of love in ours. And I mean, you look at Electrify America, you look at their origin story, they came out of the
Right.
Dieselgate scandal, and it was just like this big corporate thing that got stood up out of a government, payout mandate. And how could you have love for anything
Right.
in that situation? Not to talk bad about Electrify America. I'm sure there are people that very much care about EV drivers at that company, but I just think like if you're a startup or you're, which Tesla was and Rivian was obviously, you have to have an obsessive approach to high product quality experiences. So I think it's just like almost a metaphysical answer to your question. The
Yeah.
technology on top of it, there's a lot more that I'm not talking about that also has to go right. So it's like you got to get like all of these things together working seamlessly, whose value is greater than the sum of the individual parts. So it's and the way to like work yourself through that pain and chase those nines is really just you know coming back to the labor of love that is Electric Era. It's that mentality that we have every day that causes us to approach our jobs with intensity, because we really truly believe that we got to get EV charging infrastructure out there that's awesome if people want to drive EVs.
Yeah, that's great. And we've definitely been talking about kind of like looking back on the charging space and how electric areas started and grown. I'm kind of curious on your thoughts looking forward. Like, what do you see are some of the interesting trends in the space and kind of ways that you're looking to help stand out even further or like possibly even accelerate the rollout for electric era?
Yeah. So, of the things that we're comfortable talking about externally, I mean, I guess there's a lot. So we have a very comprehensive and almost, I think, 10 at least year view of our product roadmap, and it is pretty technically intense. Like we're aiming to do to EV fast charging what NVIDIA did to GPUs. Like we're thinking that deeply and that far afield about the problem. And much of the and obviously like we're early in that planning exercise, so it's not like we're gonna commit to doing one thing or the other. But of the things that we've identified that are really interesting, it really kind of comes back to solving some of the core points that we hit on the pod today, which is power access, power efficiency, power delivery, reliability, instantaneous and low latency control, um, product and customer experience, the driver experience at retail locations. We're gonna announce some really cool stuff there down the road as well. So I think EV drivers are going to be really, really fired up about our product roadmap, and I truly think we're going to be the cutting edge technology in the space. I think that's a pretty bold statement, but with what we see coming, I think it's actually true. I think Tesla is like very split focused, and they're going to go build Optimus and they're going to go build like new EVs and FSD. They don't really have a whole lot of bandwidth to think about the charging side of things, and that's the beauty of focus in a company is you can go and compound value around a specific niche of customer value that is highly differentiated. It creates a highly technical and cutting edge solution. So I would just say stay tuned. I mean, we got a lot of stuff coming out over the next year alone, and the years following that are going to be even more exciting.
That's great. And I think just looking at the broader EV market right now, there's, I think, a lot of narrative around that it's EV sales are slowing when in fact, other than kind of Tesla slowing down their sales, overall, it seems like a lot of the auto manufacturers are growing and increasing in their year over year sales. What do you see is the best way to kind of get people over the hump if they're skeptical about EVs or anything that's really kind of stood out to you as like the experience of it? Because I think there are so many narratives, but when you live with it day to day, you realize, oh, this is so much easier. And there's a lot of benefits over the others. I'm just kind of curious with what you've done and your experience, what you've found to try and get people interested. I think the most common and easiest way is usually just get butts and seats and
Yeah.
drive an electric vehicle. But I'm just kind of curious if there's anything that you've seen that has been of interest or kind of changed that perspective for others that might be skeptical or kind of leery of making the switch to an electric vehicle.
Well, I mean, as somebody who's watched rockets land themselves and like satellite constellations take fold and new technologies in the automotive space emerge, like it's just inevitable to me that better products and better technologies are going to come out. And I think the framework for people that are considering EV drive in EV is like you should select a very good EV car company that is reputable and has a lot of uh, excitable fans like Tesla and Rivian specifically. And you should go buy their cars. I think a lot of EVs are just not that exciting. They're just kind of like,
Yeah.
it's our attempt. We're not really good engineers and we don't really care. And here's the thing. Here's a concept car. Let's see how it does. Like those cars are terrible and I would not buy them. I think like Kia is good. Rivian is great, fantastic, really. I love their cars. I think Tesla sells incredible cars. There's others as well. Then there's a lot that are not good. The ones that are good are incredible. Like EVs are just so freaking sweet. Like it's basically the difference between a flip phone and an iPhone. Like
Right.
it's the difference between a horse and buggy and a car, a nice car. It's a quantum step improvement. Like you are in a rocket ship that accelerates extremely fast, that has like extremely low energy and maintenance costs, that drives you everywhere. It's just a quantum leap forward, and it's not and there's nothing really worth focusing on than that in the EV adoption sector. Like we should just be talking about how the product is better because it is fundamentally a superior automotive experience. And yeah, if anybody on in the audience is interested in driving one, yeah, go get your butts in your seats as Chase mentioned, and go experience it for yourself. Because once you sit in the car and you press the accelerator, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about.
No, I think you're spot on. I mean, it's interesting you mentioned kind of Kia and Hyundai because I think of the traditional automakers, they have been the best at making that transition with their product portfolio for making compelling EVs. And then otherwise, it's kind of been the completely new startups that really go back to that focus and kind of love on product that have really been able to get people passionate about cars who either haven't been or even convince people who have been traditional car enthusiasts to kind of get on board the EV bandwagon as well.
Yeah,
When
they have like a classic some of the traditional legacy companies, they have a classic innovator's dilemma problem. They don't want to
right,
have one product line cannibalize their other product line. So it kind of expect corporate strategies to reflect that that
for sure, and
constraint.
there's definitely some there's definitely been proven to be the clean sheet design versus kind of these platforms from the traditional auto OEMs that are trying to serve a bunch of different platforms. I think they've done better than I thought they would, but it's also still a clear difference in a clean sheet design for an electric vehicle versus some of these ones that have to do ICE, hybrid, all of the above, and kind of don't do any of them well. Or not even that, it's just that they're not inspiring when you drive one. But I realize we're kind of coming up on our time. And so one thing I wanted to ask you about is around, we definitely see like a lot of different EV charging, some like peak and then kind of tamper off. Others kind of might not go to the highest peak number, but will hold there for quite a while. With electric era chargers, are there like specific? Is it going to be a 350 kilowatt station? So if I roll up with a Hummer EV or whatever I have, or what are kind of like what should I expect as kind of like the base minimum usually charge rate and kind of expect for charging experience for those kinds of road trips?
Yeah, so currently everything that we have in market right now is 200 kW peak. Without sharing too many details, we're going to be a lot higher than that for our V3 product,
Sure.
which people should expect to see next year. We'll do an announcement probably early 2025 timeframe, if all things are nominal. So peak power capabilities are going to go up quite a bit. Um, on the kind of rollback question that you talked about, like the way that our software works is we will give as much power as the car can accept. And so we're always car limiting the charging station power flows, um, as opposed to, holding back unless
Right.
there's extreme high utilization and we expect like a large surge coming, then we'll start to kind of, you know, peak shave here and there and split power and more intelligently allocate power to cars so that we have enough energy in reserve for the forecasted demand. We don't really do that at all that often. But so that's that's kind of our current that's kind of our but rather it is something that might happen in the event that there is extreme usage at the station. So outside of that though, like we just give as much power to the car as it can take.
No, that's great. And I mean, even 200 kilowatts is great. So many of these are, I'm seeing even like 50 to 100 kilowatts. And I just don't think that's like really a number that's truly
Oh
like
yeah.
future proofed.
No,
So
no,
to
totally.
and there's still so many EVs that can't even hit that. So I think that's definitely great to see, and then to hear you're doing even more down the future. I think going to be great for a lot of drivers.
Yeah, one thing I noticed briefly is just like this trend line, which is peak power rate over time. In 2008, the Roadster I think had only a 27 kW peak charging rate, and
Right.
over time the leading power charge rate has increased to about I think a 17% annualized growth rate. This is like the Moore's law for fast charging. I
Right.
call it the law of the electric era, which I think will hold true until we get up to cars that can charge at about 1.2 or 1.5 megawatts for light duty vehicles, at which point you're basically on parity with the time that it takes to fill up a gas car.
Right.
So I don't know how long that'll take and if the 19% annualized year over year growth rate will continue, but that is certainly an observation that's driving our product roadmap and we think about a lot.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for coming on today, Quincy. I want to be respectful of your time. We're coming up at the top of the hour, but for anyone who's listening, what's a great way for them to learn more and kind of reach out to you to look at possibly installing some electric Era chargers at their facilities?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think if you're an EV driver, I'll answer your second question first. But if you're an EV driver, I would just encourage you to follow us on our socials. So we have a large amount of people that follow us on LinkedIn. You can find us at Electric Era. We also have a large following on Twitter. You can follow us at Electric Era Tech. You can follow me on Twitter as well at Quincy Edmund Lee. And then generally, if you're a customer and you're interested in adding EV fast charging, just go to our website, click in the upper right hand corner, request a demo, and schedule a time with one of our amazing team members to just kind of help you figure out how to navigate this next big transition in car refill. There's also a great amount of material on our website. If you're not yet ready to take a call with our team, just go to our blog under our website and feel free to peruse around and see what you like, and then give us a call when you're ready.
Thanks so much, Quincy. We'll have to have you on soon. Been really excited to follow what Electric Era has been doing and some of the upcoming announcements as well. I'm sure we'll have to have you back soon.
Thanks, Chase. Good to be here.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Grid Connections podcast with Quincy Lee, the founder of Electric Era. We hope you enjoyed our deep dive into the world of EV charging and learned how Electric Era is making a mark with its innovative software and customer-focused approach. If you found this episode insightful, please share it with at least one other person who would appreciate it as well. Also, don't forget to leave us a positive review on our podcast page. It helps us reach more listeners like you and continue bringing top-tier content every week. Until next week, this is the Grid Connections podcast, signing off.